Well, we're going to shift gears a little bit. We have a different take on this. How do we prepare graduates who will do good in the world from within the Olin faculty? I mentioned that there's a project at Olin that was initiated in the last 12 months that has to do with doing good. And it's based really on a few words that are in our founding precepts at Olin to produce graduates who will do good in the world. Feel like we've been doing that, but probably more accidentally than deliberately. And so we're planning to be more intentional and more deliberate and to fan the flames and to feed this in a thoughtful way. And this is a relatively new effort. It involves a significant fraction of the Olin faculty, and we have two outstanding representatives of the faculty who've been thinking about that from the beginning. And they're here to help us get a sense of how this program started, where it is now, and where it's going. So one of them is Rebecca Christianson, who is actually a professor of applied physics. And the other one here is Alison Wood, who is an assistant professor of environmental science. So will you bring us up to speed?
There we go. Hello, I am indeed Alison Wood, and I am pleased to be here with my colleague Rebecca Christianson to talk to you about doing good in the world at Olin College. I'd like to start by telling you a story. In the beginning, when we created the design stream, we made a conscious effort to shape the themes and values of that stream. We looked around and we saw engineering education focused primarily on artifacts and technology. We chose to emphasize artifacts and technology plus people and society. In this vision, our user-oriented collaborative design course overtly says that engineering is by, with, for, and about people. All of our students spent a full semester on this in the sophomore year. In the beginning, many students were unsure about this, but they were fairly open to it. A small group of students were thrilled to discover collaborative design, and a vocal few were angry and frustrated because they thought this was not engineering. In fact, in the world outside of Olin, a lot of people thought that this was not engineering. But we put a stake in the ground. We said this is what engineering should be. And over time, it's become integral not just to how we do engineering at Olin, but throughout the engineering education world. We were built to help redefine engineering, and we've been a key player in doing just that. In fact, engineering has been redefined at least a few times in the past, and we think it's time to do it again. We'd like to tell you today about the great need that is at the forefront of engineering education, a need that educators and practitioners alike have widely identified. Engineering is clamoring for more doing good in the world to be deeply integrated into our technical work. While many people are considering this, we haven't yet found anyone who has truly made the transformation that we aspire to. Olin is uniquely poised to lead the way. We were built around the needs of the engineer of 2020. Now it's time to think about how to educate the engineer of 2050. We know that this is the need, and we know that the Olin community is passionate about meeting it. What we're working out together is exactly how. So we'd like to share with you a community story of how we've nurtured doing good in the world through our history, how we've done a lot of important work in this space already, and yet it lives in pockets. It's too easy for a student to opt out of many of the courses that most embrace it. There is so much for us yet to learn and to act on. We'll tell you more about the need that's been widely identified by educators and practitioners alike, and how our community is coming together to better understand and address it. We'll share the story of the exploration program we've undertaken for the last year, thanks to the generosity of Sunlen Cho, whose gift has enabled us to dive really deeply into this work. And we'll share some key pieces of what we've learned in our exploring. We'll conclude with a look to the future as we can consider how we build on our strong foundations to undertake the work remaining within Olin necessary to advance, and then to lead the way once again as we help to redefine good engineering as marrying technical prowess with doing good in the world. So let's go back to the very beginning, our founding precepts, as Rick mentioned. We've always been redefining what good engineering looks like. At our inception, that meant project-based, hands-on, design-centered learning. Our founding precepts also include doing good for humankind. This is built into who we are. The phrase, doing good in the world, has emerged as our community shorthand for all of the pieces that make up that good for humankind. As we showed in our first story, human-centered design has always been one of the key pieces for us. But doing good in the world is a big umbrella, and within our community, we embrace many aspects of it. We're in the midst of an ongoing conversation about which pieces of it we each emphasize as individuals and which we want to prioritize as a community. We've talked at length about the choice of words and the meanings of those words. We have not resolved this issue among ourselves, but some of the language that consistently rises to the surface in these conversations includes human-centered design, design that focuses on addressing the needs of stakeholders, ethics, collective and individual standards of right and wrong, equity, engaging in practices that center the dignity and agency of all stakeholders as full participants in our work, and recognizing the importance of self-awareness, access, and caring for one another. Context, often used to refer to the surroundings of the technologies we study and design. Sustainability, acting with an interdependent and long-term model of the future in mind, linking people, the larger biosphere, and the built environment. Citizenship, or professional service to society. And socially responsible engineering, which recognizes that engineers and our technologies have significant impacts on society. We'd like to share with you a few more stories of the ways we've been nurturing this work over the years. In our earliest years, President Rick Miller stepped in to provide ethics in our curriculum by launching a course titled Issues in Leadership and Ethics, enlisting the presidents of Babson and Wellesley to teach it with him. The course ran for 10 years and helped establish that studying ethics is valued up to the highest levels of our institution. Rick has told us a story that I want to share with you about one student in the course many years ago. The class exercise was, suppose you go to the grocery store on a snowy day, you get back to your car and you're about to leave and you realize you've been given too much change. Specifically, you've been given $1 too much. What are you going to do? What if you've been given $20 too much? What if you've been given $5 too much? Well, the students were discussing this in small groups, and one student became very emotional in the middle of this. She said that at first, when she got too much change, she just thought it was good karma. It was some kind of cosmic payback for having done good things recently. But then she realized that the clerk would be held accountable for having the register short at the end of the day, and the student had a very strong emotional response to realizing the consequences that her action would have on another person. Learning more about how the world really works helped that student understand the consequences of her choice. Our students really are doing their best to make ethical decisions, but we need to help them by teaching them. Understanding the consequences that their actions have for other people will help them make informed choices about acting on their values. If we shift from thinking about individuals to thinking more about groups of people, we move further into the realm of Professor Katrin Lynch, who is an anthropologist attracted to teaching at Olin specifically because of the doing good in the world part of our mission. She brings her concern for social inequities into the classroom, where she integrates technical and anthropological perspectives. We want to share 2 examples of her teaching work. Last fall in her class, Dirt to Shirt, which examines the global apparel industry, students worked with a local organization that partners with craftswomen in Ghana who are combating the problem of donated or discarded clothing that shifts fashion waste from the United States to landfills in Africa. That picture in the middle is actually a mountain of discarded clothing, and if you look closely, you can see on the left there is a person that gives you a sense of scale. We're sending that overseas. So students in this class designed a way to cut thin uniform strips from old discarded American t-shirts so they could be repurposed, as you see here on the right. An additional team in the class made a social media video to help inform people in the US about this problem and the consequences of their actions discarding clothes. These students worked both to find technical options to help real people address a real problem and to help a wider group of people understand the impact of their actions on people living far away. The other course of Katrin's that I would like to introduce you to is Engineering for Humanity, first created with Professor Lynn Andrea Stein, and since then co-taught most frequently with Professor Ella Benur and most recently with alumna Tess Edmonds. Students in this class identify and design service projects while working with senior citizens in our local community, ending with implementable adaptable, and sustainable solutions. The course draws equally on empathetic and ethnographic methods and on a technical understanding of the problem and solution spaces. In addition to the design projects, students do an aging action assignment in which they're asked to immerse themselves in the broader experience of aging in society and to consider how to affect it with design. So in Engineering for Humanity, we have a class that integrates how we do engineering with why we do it. It builds perspective and empathy while teaching design skills. Some of our courses help to illustrate the evolution over time of our work with doing good in the world. Professors Rob Martello and John Stolk conceived of the course Stuff of History as an early project-based experiment in interdisciplinary integration, bringing together material science and history. From the very first iteration of this course, context was brought into a science experience. But Rob estimated that only about a third of the total experience was integrated at the very beginning. Within a few iterations of the course, however, they fully integrated the experience so that context and science fully supported each other. Context at this stage was largely historical and social context. This inclusion of context continued to evolve over time to include more new perspectives, such as an emphasis on sustainability, increased environmental impact analyses, and discussions of ethical frameworks and perspectives. After about 9 iterations of the course, Rob and John decided to retire it and explore new teaching opportunities. And Rob actually went on to explore applying what he had learned in Stuff of History in new courses. He created a collection of new team talk courses with colleagues that explored the concepts of ethics and contextualized learning with an increasing emphasis on doing good in the world. These courses include 6 Microbes That Changed the World with Professor Jean Wong, integrating history and biology, Chemistry in Context with Professor Scott Hershey, integrating history with environmental chemistry, Paradigms, Predictions, and Jewels with Wellesley Professor Dan Brabander, integrating environmental history and environmental science and modeling. And actually, Rob and I co-taught a course together this spring called Change the World as part of our Grand Challenges Scholars Program, integrating ethics and critical reflection with other topics from that program. Interdisciplinary integration met user-centered design when Professor Zhenya Zastavkar and Professor Sarah Hendren collaborated on a project in Zhenya's mechanics class. Zhenya has described a standard mechanics class as inclined planes on steroids, so it was a natural fit for the students in her class to work with dancer Alice Shepard, who uses a wheelchair and frequently works with ramps. The students worked with Alice through the semester, first to understand the movements that she uses in her choreography, and then to create a surface composed of inclined planes that she could use in crafting a new piece. And this is indeed a story that the New York Times did on that project, Alice collaborating with our students. The Boston Globe also did a story, and the Globe quoted Sarah talking about the human-centered design aspect of the project. She talked about the human stakes of having an actual partner who you care about and whose work you admire. And she said, then you do your best work for and with that person. Students in the course also commented at the time that they could, quote, appreciate the curves and equations to calculate the shape of the ramp, but would rather explain the ramp's social and function design together. And they also said, not only did we build something that's cool in its own right, we also built something that's useful and serves the purpose that it's designed for. So we see incorporating aspects of doing good in the world into our work really does make for both better and more meaningful engineering. The branches of this work also sometimes extend beyond the bounds of a single course or a research group. Professor Scott Hershey joined Olin from 3 years in South Africa, where he worked in a unique partnership between academia, industry, government, and NGOs to understand the dynamics and sources of air pollution in townships, and then to implement and evaluate the efficacy of home and community level interventions for reducing residents' exposure. He brought that model of collaborative, community-engaged, and impact-oriented research to Olin, where he established the Air Quality Impact Research Group, or the AIR Group, which exists to reduce ultrafine particle exposure in affected Boston communities in technically, socially, culturally, and economically sound ways in order to improve long-term health. Scott and his students spent 2 years building relationships and learning from the residents in the neighborhoods around Logan Airport, and they've been running pilot studies to determine effective strategies for reducing residents' exposure to air pollutants. This work has spanned multiple projects, including in multiple courses, including Affordable Design and Entrepreneurship, our Scope capstone course, and independent research. To address the problems they found, students have been collecting and publishing scientific data. They've been building a community-owned monitoring network and software to democratize air quality data. They've also been collaborating with Professor Tim Ferguson-Sauter and his Return Design Studio students on novel marketing materials for an awareness campaign. They've also been collaborating with a local artist, Susan Israel, on a public art installation for East Boston to raise awareness and to help residents understand how to take action. The AIR group has brought together students across courses working with a variety of community stakeholders and collaborators to make both immediate and long-term contributions, with their technical work both motivated by and infused with doing good in the world. These stories give just a glimpse of our larger picture. Doing good in the world is and has been embedded through our curriculum in many places and in many ways. And it's not limited to our curriculum. It's widespread in our learning continuum and our entire community, and this is by no means a complete list. But if we come back to this amazing list of courses, we see that actually only a few of them are taken by all of our students. Many of these are optional courses. And even though we know that design is an integral part of engineering, we often hear Olin students talking about design and quote-unquote technical courses as being separate things. And they say that doing good in the world only happens in design, not in what they perceive as this technical work. They say that if you care about people, you have to major in design. And they often ask questions about how to bring doing good in the world into the other work that they care about. We want to help them understand that doing good in the world is integral to all of engineering by fully providing that integration in our curriculum. So even with all this good work that we're doing, there's so much ahead of us. The deep integration of doing good in the world into all of our most technical work, not displacing quantitative work, but marrying the two together, is what engineering education has maybe not quite figured out how to do yet. This is what we're working toward at Olin, and we know we're not there yet. So we'd actually like to tell you another story, a story about the need. It's a story, to start with, of a graduate and a current trustee who is here with us today. We'd like to invite Greg Merritt to please come up front and spend a few minutes telling his story to us himself.
Does the next slide introduce me, or? No, I'm good, okay. Oh yeah, we're there. Cool, thanks. Hi, I'm Greg Merritt. I'm a 2010 alumni of Olin. I'm actually now on Olin's board as of recently, and I'm a director of product management at Facebook. I spent the last 6 years, at Facebook in California, 2 years before that at Google, and moved back to the Boston area for personal reasons. Last fall, my wife and I had a daughter in January and wanted to be closer to family. I think this theme of doing good is a really interesting one, especially because it's one that I've personally encountered a lot in my career, where there's a lot of challenges where it's not obvious what good is. I think these difficult trade-offs that technology creates are some of the things where we have an opportunity to give people a toolkit to think through some of the really hard problems that today's technology practitioners are going to encounter. In 2016, I joined a team at Facebook called the Newsfeed Integrity Team, which was the team that works on Newsfeed, the homepage of Facebook that ranks all the stuff from your friends, that was tasked with addressing problems like misinformation, algorithmic manipulation, virality of junky content, and content moderation and policies. These are some pretty heavy issues that we really haven't figured out all the answers to. And I'm not here today to officially represent Facebook in any way, but I think that my perspective gives me my experience gives me some interesting perspective on some of the challenges that people actually face in the world, taking technology and applying it to try to solve problems. Some of the most interesting areas, I think, are where, because technology is an accelerant that makes things easier, less expensive, and brings the impossible to the possible, suddenly there's a lot more of something happening, and you have to figure out, is that more good or bad, or what's the mix? One of the popular areas to talk about this is AI bias. Basically, AI systems are able to make lots of decisions really rapidly. So I'm going to talk through a couple examples of things here, and I'm going to go really fast, not to downplay the complexity of these situations, but just because I only have a short time. When I was at Olin, I did a project for one of my courses with some colleagues where we took, it was a machine learning project. No one had invented the term AI to apply to this yet. We took New York Times articles and attempted to predict whether the author was male or female. There's actually a lot of research into author identification that kind of started from trying to figure out who wrote the Federalist Papers, and later the Enron email corpus became one of the large corpora that people did research in this on. And it turns out in the Enron email corpus, you can actually identify whether the author of an email is male or female based on certain traits that people happen to have in writing. So we tried to build a system that could look at New York Times articles and predict was the author male or female. Turns out our system was completely unable to discriminate between the genders of authors. We attributed this perhaps to the New York Times' strict editorial standards. But this question of if you're able to use gender and build systems that take that in as an input is one that we're going to face more and more in the real world with all kinds of interesting attributes of people. If a friend comes to you and says that they're looking for a job, you might say, oh, I've heard of something recently, you should apply to this. They apply to the job, get the job, you've done good in the world. You could build an app that helps people come and find jobs, and you want to make lots of recommendations, not just one recommendation to one friend, but millions of job recommendations to millions of people. Of course, you don't know these people as well as you know your friends, so you have to get information about them, about their background, their skills, the kinds of jobs they might be interested in, and then you can make more personalized recommendations. However, there's a bunch of existing biases in the world about who applies to what jobs and who takes what jobs. Naively, your app is going to recommend more nursing jobs to women because nurses are more likely to be women, and probably people who use your app, women will be more likely to go and apply to those jobs. Is that an appropriate thing for you to do? Should you be using gendered information in making these job recommendations? You cannot ask people for their gender. You can say, I'm going to occlude that. But then if someone tells you they have a nursing degree, they're much more likely to be female, and you're basically using that information once more in the app. It's not obvious what the right solution here is. You could decide not to build a job recommendation app at all, but then you're also missing an opportunity to help a bunch of people find jobs, and that might be something that we would desire to have happen. As another example, one of the big challenges, or I think big problems the world is thinking through right now, is around what kind of communication should be private communication, what kind of communication should be public communication. There's texting apps that will end-to-end encrypt the messages you send so that nobody can read them. Not the service provider, not governments, no one except the two people using the phones. WhatsApp, the most popular texting app in the world, owned by Facebook, all the text messages are end-to-end encrypted, and Facebook is unable to access the content of those messages. So when a government comes to WhatsApp and says, we'd like the messages sent by these political dissidents, we say, sorry, we're technically unable to provide those to you. When law enforcement comes to us and they say, hey, we'd like these messages from these people we think are committing crimes, we say, sorry, we're unable to provide those to you. There's a bunch of advantages that come from being able to privately communicate with anyone. There's a bunch of disadvantages that come from it. This is one of the kinds of hairy, trade-off situations that people are going to face in the world. And I think what's interesting, or actually on that point in particular, what's interesting, a lot of these problems aren't new problems. If you go back and read Wired magazine issue number 1, there's an article about cryptography. It was written early on in the internet, and it debates whether or not cryptography is going to be a thing that remains legal in the United States or whether it's going to be something that's regulated about who's allowed to use cryptography. The article points out that the advantages of keeping cryptography legal will be that we can do e-commerce and buy stuff online and bank online. That's been a pretty awesome thing in the last couple of decades. But it points out the same disadvantages of the bad guys are going to use cryptography too. And it's not like this problem became a problem in the early 90s either. I think the question for many of these things is that they're not actually fundamentally technology problems. They're fundamentally broader philosophy and societal objective problems that people have been struggling with for thousands of years. And I think the key thing that we need to do is help expose the tools for thinking about these kinds of problems that people have been thinking about for a very long time, and expose people to real situations that have these difficult trade-offs, where it's easy to say, the better thing is to not cheat on your test. In some of these examples, there's very real pros and cons on both sides of the equation, and it's not sure which side maximizes good and minimizes harm. President Miller likes to talk a lot about the idea that the point of Olin is, an Olin engineer is to think about a way the world has never been and do whatever it takes to make it that way. But anytime you change a system, you're going to introduce positive things to the system and negative things to the system. And so how do we give people the tools to think through that? One of the things I think is actually most interesting in my Olin experience of exposure to these actual kinds of situations is Olin has a thing called the honor board. Every Olin student signs an honor code when they show up that commits to certain community values. And when a community member feels that one of those values has been compromised, they can submit a case to the honor board that will figure out what the appropriate resolution is. I think it's a really interesting example because it exposes a lot of those very hard community norms governance problems to the students at Olin. And while only certain students are on each honor board case and actually know what the discussion and decision was, sometimes word would get out about what cases were happening, and there'd be a lot of interesting debates among students about what the appropriate course of action to take was. So I think the point there is those are extremely real questions about what is the right way to resolve this difficult moral or ethical conversation that people got exposed to as part of the overall programming of Olin, even if not part of the academic curriculum. So I think as these things point out, the really challenging example is when you take things into the real context of the world and your decisions have an influence on other people and not just the academic curriculum. So I'm excited about a bunch of the opportunities Olin has to really weave some of these real world examples through the curriculum and bring these tools for thinking about how to make these difficult trade-offs to more of our students and alumni.
Greg, thank you so very much. That was fabulous. As Greg has so nicely illustrated for us, these problems are really complicated, and we have a lot of work still that we could be doing at Olin and for engineering education more broadly to really try and infuse more of this across our curriculum and our entire institution. So into this whole picture, enter Sunlen Cho to our story. Sunlen Cho is a former Board of Trustees member of Olin College who served on the board for many years. He's also a pioneer in the semiconductor industry and did a lot of research and development work in that industry. During his time at Olin, Sunlen became very passionate about the founding precepts, about Olin's intention to be an important and constant contributor to the advancement of engineering education in America and throughout the world, and through its graduates to do good for humankind. And he had the realization that if we want to be an important and constant contributor to the advancement of engineering education, that means we actually need a research and development operation. And we don't actually have one yet. We revolutionized engineering education when we were founded, when we began, according to our founding precepts for hands-on learning and incorporating design. But if we're not constantly looking to the future and thinking about what the big challenges of the future engineering education is, then we're not going to be important and constant contributors to the advancement of engineering education. So he created the Explorers Program. This program was funded through an initial gift from him for a pilot version, where the goal was to create a research and development arm, if you will, for Olin College, to explore new directions for engineering education, new methods, high impact, bold, risky, things that we could look at doing with engineering education to really improve engineering education at Olin and in the world in general. And as part of this program, to develop an approach to systematic support for innovative research and future directions in engineering education. I want to paraphrase this using Star Trek, which was one of Sunlen Cho's passions. He was very into Star Trek. So the Explorers mission was to explore strange new worlds of education, to seek out new inspiration and new academic structures, to boldly go where no college has gone before. So this was the founding of the Explorers Program, which occurred last spring. The initial exploration team was Professor John Geddes and myself. And we worked with Sunlen Cho in the early days of this program last spring to really think about how to engage in this effort, how to build a research effort towards looking at future directions for engineering education. And in the initial days of this, John and I spent a good deal of time thinking about a really broad array of ideas for future directions for exploration of engineering education. Everything from simple overhauls of the course structure and the course calendar of the school to a complete rethinking of what an educational institution ought to look like. But as we went through this exercise of just developing this enormous swath of ideas, we came to realize that one of the most important metrics for which idea we really wanted to dig deep on was that it really needed to be centered in our community, in what the community at Olin College cares about, where people want to see the college go as we go into the future. Because if we're going to do a deep dive exploration into something in this college, it needs to be something that the faculty, the students, the staff, everyone at the school cares deeply about. So last spring, at a community-wide retreat that incorporated faculty, students, and staff from across the college, we engaged the community in a visioning exercise to look at the future of Olin College and think about where we as a community would like to see the college go. What do we think the big challenges that Olin should be tackling in the future are? So we asked people to engage in sort of a science fiction exercise, to picture the world in 2050. What's changed in society and technology, health, the weather, demographics? right? And now that you have your science fiction world of the future, what's Olin like in this year, 2050? Where have we gone? What are we doing? Who are we? What is our identity, right? How has Olin contributed to make the world what it is now? Okay, so now that you have that in your mind, look backwards. How did we get there? Write the timeline of Olin from 2020 to 2050. How did we become who we are in 2050, and how have we had the influence that we want to have on the world? So when we ran this exercise with the community at Olin College, there were a lot of themes that emerged. One very important one was that people really want to make sure that Olin is continuously a change agent in the world. There were some specific examples, people thinking about multiple Olins. What if we spawn more Olins around the world, increase our impact? What if we restructure the college to really think deeply about how to have the biggest impact? There was a lot of commitment to diversity and inclusion, making sure that we're thinking really broadly about who it is that we are bringing into the world of engineering. Who is it that we're sending out into the world? But throughout all of this, there was a very strong and steady theme across a large amount of the community towards what's in our founding precepts, to do good for the world, to do good for humankind. Now, this took a lot of different forms, as Alison talked through, where people had different parts of doing good for the world that spoke to them, that resonated with them. But the overarching message of Olin as doing good for the world, of creating graduates, creating engineers who do good for the world, was incredibly strong. And it was not just with the students, faculty, and staff at Olin right now, the community on campus, that this message resonated. We spent a lot of time talking to our alumni, talking to folks like Greg, and we went out to the Bay Area. We talked to a number of alumni there. We held a visioning exercise similar to the one I just described at our alumni weekend here on campus. And as we talked to more and more alumni, we found that increasingly our alumni are facing these same questions about the ethics and social impact of the technology that they are helping bring into the world. And this desire to see Olin graduates become more socially conscious, more ethical, and effective leaders in multiple areas, even beyond technology, but bringing in their technical knowledge. And that Olin has the ability and the opportunity to lead in this conversation. I want to talk about another alumni story that I feel really brings home some of this point. So this story is from an Olin alum who wishes to remain anonymous. Because these are very challenging and complicated topics, and they can be very fraught for our alumni. This alumni is in a job that he loves. He's doing technical work that he's having a really good time with. It's what he was trained to do. It's what he wanted to do in the world. But recently, his company started to go in a direction with the technology that he's helping create that he's not comfortable with, that he doesn't feel necessarily aligns with his personal values. And so to put it in his own words, at some point recently, I realized that as an engineer, I have a profound effect on the future of the world. Like it or not, the skills that engineers have, the reason that engineers can be paid many sums of the salary of other professions, is because engineers are force multipliers in businesses. What we do has impact. I can't build anything meaningful alone, but that doesn't mean I'm powerless in shaping what I help to create. I realize that I can and need to be helping my company do good, not only well. So this is a powerful message of an alumni, a young alumni out in the world, realizing that the engineering that he's doing, the technologies that he's creating have impacts, and that he needs to make sure that those impacts are in alignment with the change that he wants to see in the world, with the values that he holds. We looked beyond the Olin community as well. We looked beyond our alumni, beyond our students, faculty, and staff, to take a reading of the entire engineering education community. Okay, we didn't talk to the entire engineering education community, that would be a stretch. We talked to a bunch of people. We went to a bunch of different institutions. We talked to a lot of people from a broad array of different schools. We also went to the Frontiers in Education conference and talked to a lot of people who thought very deeply about engineering education and the challenges of engineering education. And to each of these, we asked the same question. We asked, in the future of engineering education, what do you see are the biggest challenges? And we heard time and time and again these same themes that came up: the social responsibility, the ethical responsibility, the sustainability and environmental responsibility of engineers to think deeply about the engineering, the technology they are creating. At the Frontiers in Education conference, I participated in a visioning exercise very similar to the Olin 2050 exercise that I described to you, that envisions the engineer of 2040. This exercise was run with a whole room full of engineering educators at Frontiers in Education, and it had previously been run at the Harvey Mudd Design Conference with even more engineering educators. And at both of these events, the same themes emerged. The same themes of the challenges of engineering, of educating engineers for 2040 being centered around social responsibility, around ethical responsibility. And how do we do that? How do we educate our students well for that? So there's a growing consensus in the engineering education community that training engineers to authentically do good in the world is a challenge that we need to be confronting now as engineering educators. It's a complicated problem, multifaceted, and no one really knows how to do this well. There's significant opportunity here for Olin to really think deeply about this, explore deeply. In the words of Joe Ito, if we don't consider how technology affects the whole system, it's like putting a jetpack on everyone without a clear sense of where we're going. So we need to start to have a sense of where we're going. Now, why should Olin take on this challenge? Well, we've shown ourselves to be willing and able to experiment and try new things. We're small, we're nimble, we can move fast, change directions, try things out. Get things wrong, try again. We have people on campus already. Alison talked you through several magnificent examples of people with the knowledge and experience who've already been exploring themes in doing good in the world, and how do we really try to educate students in this vein. We've been doing a lot of do-learn education here, where we contextualize the learning already through real experiential examples. So bringing context, societal context, ethical context into that learning is a natural extension. There's also a feature of ethical process that demands collaboration, and this is already a focus of what we do on campus, of how we operate. This idea that who you are as an institution needs to reflect your values so that those can be communicated well to your students. In the words of an alumni, Lee Edwards, class of '07, I think that Olin should take the same approach to ethics that it takes to engineering. Hands-on, practical, collaborative, involving the real world, and willing to throw the old book out. So that's what we're trying to do with the exploration program that Sunlen Cho so presciently funded for us. We are at an inflection point where we see a lot of opportunities to expand and enhance what we're doing in doing good in the world, to connect the initiatives that we already have on campus and make them really touch all students, to link our curriculum with our community and our culture to make this truly institution-wide, and to really redefine engineering again, to make sure that students understand that considering social, ethical responsibility, authentically doing good in the world is part of what engineering is, part of what every engineering project has to consider. So we need to figure out how to do this. This is a challenge. This is not an easy problem, right? So we formed a team to start to dig deep in this, to dive deep and to really think intentionally about how we can start to build a program that tries to achieve this ambitious goal. So this team, the core team, consists of Professor Debbie Chatra, myself, Professor Erhard Grafe, Professor Kelsey Houston Edwards, Professor Paul Ruvalo, and my colleague, Professor Alison Wood here. But I have to say, it wasn't just us. This team of 6 spent many, many hours on this during the course of this semester, working through the exploration program. But many, many more people than just us were involved in this effort during this past semester and even the entire preceding year. It involved students, faculty, and staff from across the college engaging in a variety of different initiatives that address doing good in the world in a number of different ways. We can't possibly acknowledge them all here, so I'll just say this has really been a community-based process, community effort. For our group, we decided to kick off our community-based effort through a second academic retreat specifically focused on doing good in the world that occurred this past January. We brought together, again, students, faculty, and staff to think about doing good in the world with 3 main foci. One was knowledge sharing. As we've mentioned, we have a lot of people here, a lot of great examples of really inspirational work in training students, teaching students, developing students towards doing good in the world. We wanted to share those amongst the community, inspire other people in the community with those efforts. We spent some time exploring the challenges of engineering today, some of the really complicated questions that our graduates are having to wrestle with as they get out into the world, and thinking about how do we equip our students with the tools necessary to be able to confront those challenges. And we started trying to work towards a common language. This is a big, broad umbrella of different topics, different ways of thinking about doing good in the world, and we wanted to start to have a common way of talking to understand that we're all working towards the same common goal. We continued with frequent connections with faculty and staff through a series of academic life meetings over the course of the semester to explore community values, collaborative process, curricular practice, and faculty collaboration. So we wanted to make sure that we really had a truly collaborative and community effort towards this project. As we conducted our research, as we explored readings and looked at programs from across the country and around the world that have been working at this and thinking hard about this, we shared those findings with the community during weekly meetings that were attended by students, faculty, and staff again. We discussed our readings, we had deep conversations about language, we elicited feedback on ideas that we had, and we actually invited in external speakers, experts from off campus, to share their thoughts and their understandings of the world. Students were not isolated in this either. They participated in all the events that we've already talked about, and they also took initiative to take their own events into hand. So one very particular forum, the students have this event on Wednesday nights called Stay Late and Create, which is entirely student-run. The students do all the programming for it, and it hosts a variety of different events. Over the course of this semester, there have been multiple events in the theme of ethics and doing good in the world that the students created and ran themselves. In addition, there's a co-curricular this semester where a group of students worked with Professor Erhard Greff to put together the founding documents to make Olin a charter member of the Public Interest Technology Network, to start to bring public interest technology, which is to say technology projects for the public good, right into our curriculum and onto our campus in even greater numbers than we already have. So we've done a lot of work this semester. We spent a lot of time reading and talking and really exploring what's out there. And we have some insights. We definitely have a significant opportunity to integrate and connect activities on campus that already exist with a lot of passion on campus for issues of diversity and inclusion, sustainability, ethical reflection, and projects, real practice of students and faculty doing good in the world. We've been working through this entire thing at a community-based transformation process to really make sure that our process is ethical, our process is socially conscious, our process takes into account the entire community. This requires patience, it requires time, it requires communication. And we've realized as well that professional development is a crucial key to what we're trying to do. Most of us were trained as scientists or engineers. We weren't trained in ethics, we weren't trained in STS, Science, Technology, and Society departments. This is new to us, and we need to learn ourselves. We need to grow and develop as faculty members in order to be able to do this well. We've had some themes that have emerged through our readings, through our discussions with experts and everything. Some of these are going to sound very familiar from Howard and Wendy's talk through. We've found themes of different attributes, different ways of approaching doing good in the world, sort of your prerequisite list, if you might. Themes of knowledge, intellectual humility, perspective and empathy, voice and practice. Just to spend a brief moment on some of this. So knowledge and intellectual humility, we want to train engineers that will do good in the world, authentically, thoughtfully, in a complicated world, be able to do good in the world. So first off, they're engineers. They need knowledge of engineering. You can't do engineering without being trained as an engineer. You also have to have knowledge, though, of how that engineering affects the world. Context, systems thinking, the ability to draw connections between what you do over here and what happens over here. Right? That's extraordinarily important. It's a complicated world, and those impacts can get very, very broad and wide-reaching. But even more important than these, I think, is an awareness and acknowledgement of what you do not know. And this is the concept of intellectual humility. The idea that you need to be able to identify when you've reached the limits of your understanding, to acknowledge it, to be able to say, okay, I don't know the answer to that maybe somebody else knows that better than I do. Intellectual humility is actually something that's been linked as a key ingredient to critical thinking, lifelong learning, productive dialogue, and resisting confirmation bias, which in our information-saturated world is a really important skill. And it's an important component to being able to authentically do good in the world. We heard Howard talk about the idea of a fundamentalist as being someone who's rigidly attached to their own way of thinking. Intellectual humility is the opposite of that. Perspective and empathy. Alison talked some about this in some of our UOCD and Engineering for Humanity classes, about working with actual stakeholders, working with people to really understand them. You need to be able to understand your own personal perspective, and then understand the perspectives of other people, and understand that those perspectives will be different than yours and equally valid. And then develop empathy for the situation of others, to be able to really feel as they feel. And not in a utilitarian way, not in the perspective of, well, I have to understand how people feel so I can develop a better product for them, but in a way that really helps you feel for them and want to make sure that the impact that you're having on their lives is beneficial. And finally, voice and practice. Again, this is a topic that's come up before, but you need to actually be able to identify your own personal values and have the ability to give voice to those values and take action on them. You have to have the development of your own moral identity, know who you are. And the development of this in the psychological literature requires practice of service. It actually requires going out there and doing it, serving society, having that practice of making moral and ethical decisions. So this is something that we really need to make sure is within our curriculum and within our students' experience. So a lot of these insights actually don't come from engineering. Most of them actually don't come from engineering. Engineers haven't really been studying this. These come from places like Harvard, from medical schools, from social work, right? These are the people who've been studying how do you pedagogically approach doing good in the world. So what does this mean for redefining engineering?
Well, I'm going to take us back again to our founding precepts. So we recall that we were created both to advance engineering education and to do good for humankind. How wonderfully farsighted of our founders to include this phrase in our founding precepts. According to the National Science Foundation and other important voices from engineering schools and industry at the time, specific changes were needed in engineering education when Olin was founded, including interdisciplinary and integrated teaching, hands-on learning, teamwork, and an understanding of business practices. These have been center stage at Olin, and they are integral parts of the educational experience that we've created. Our founding precepts also tell us that being continually open to change and encouraging and supporting a culture of innovation is paramount. They emphasize constant improvement in every aspect of our operations and program. So, we were created to change engineering education in response to the overwhelming needs of the time, and we've seen incredible success in our work thus far. We've helped to address that need and to bring engineering education to a point where a new need has come to the forefront as being both urgent and critical. Our role continues to be to see the need and to address it. We're looking ahead to what the new norm of engineering education needs to be in 2050, and we're enacting it today. Just as we recognized 20 years ago that we needed engineers with interdisciplinary, integrated, hands-on experience, able to work well in teams and understand business, we're once again recognizing a new set of skills and mindsets that our engineering grads need. One way to think about integrating these approaches into the technical work of engineering is to start with the core engineering concept of delineating the boundaries of the system under study. As a regular part of engineering practice, we draw a box that separates the system we're paying attention to, which is inside the box, from its surroundings, which are outside the box. We're taught to define the smallest, simplest system that we can to make the problem tractable. Flows can cross the boundaries, but once they're in the surroundings, poof, we don't have to worry about them anymore. We stop paying attention to them. But we know in reality there are consequences for what's outside the box. There are consequences for the people that are outside the box, for the environment, for the future beyond the short time scale of our analysis or design. What if we could pay attention to those? What if we could go beyond our limited boundaries in time and space and society. We're not saying we need to include the whole planet in every decision that we make. We recognize the necessity of delineating the system. We're just saying, let's practice making the box just a little bit bigger in the social dimension and the temporal dimension, as well as spatially. At Olin, we've already gotten some practice at making the box bigger along the social axis. In that user-oriented collaborative design class, we extend the box to include not just the technology, but the people who are intended to use it. Extending the box further might look like considering people who don't use the technology directly but are still affected by it. Growing the box temporally aligns with sustainability. An example we've seen at Olin already is how the course design nature shifted from using plastic-based materials for prototyping to using more easily recyclable and lower impact cardboard materials. An example of how we might grow a box spatially comes from my own field of environmental engineering. We engineer fancy synthetic pesticides and apply them to fields in the Midwest, but instead of drawing a box just around one field or around the state of Iowa, we might draw our box to include the Mississippi River and the pollutants that flow down it into the Gulf of Mexico to create a dead zone that in the year of 2018 was bigger than the state of Delaware. So in our normal technical practice, we're already considering the temporal, the spatial, and the social, and we're drawing a box. To better integrate doing good in the world, we could think about a slightly longer timescale, a slightly farther reach, a slightly larger group of people affected. These are the kinds of changes that we're talking about in our community. They might seem like relatively small shifts in our practice, just expanding that box, but they require transformations in how we define engineering. This transformation is the need, and Olin is uniquely positioned to lead the way. We've been talking extensively as a community, and we've heard over and over again that we are committed to doing this. The work that lies ahead of us, the community-based transformation that Rebecca mentioned, and that requiring ongoing professional development and collaboration, it will be challenging and it will be exciting. It will allow us to do what we've done once before. It will help us spread a new definition of engineering far beyond our own campus in this transformation of engineering education and practice. In the beginning, we put a stake in the ground and we said engineering should be this. We helped to redefine engineering. We've been a key player for nearly 20 years. However, when it comes to doing good in the world, we're still working on our individual projects and courses, collaborating with a few colleagues, nurturing our foundation. But when we send each class of grads out into the future, think how much more we can offer them when we go beyond each of us working individually toward these goals and dedicate ourselves as a community to collectively learning, growing, and innovating to infuse doing good in the world into everything that we do. 20 years ago, we saw the need in engineering education. We built a new vision of what good engineering is and how to educate for it. We're very proud of how successful we've been in leading the embrace of this vision around the world. While we do have work ahead of us as a community to realize our newest aspiration, once again, we're seeing the need and leading into the future.
So Alison and I are really here only as spokespeople for a much larger group of people who've been really deeply engaged in this effort. So many people that we couldn't possibly begin to thank or acknowledge them all. It really has been a community-wide effort that's been building and growing over the course of this entire year. But we cannot complete our presentation without offering appreciation and thanks to Sunlen Cho. Sunlen Cho's vision and generosity began this initiative last May. And we were unfortunate enough to lose him in December of last year. We will deeply miss his partnership, his insights, and his guidance. I personally greatly appreciated the time I got to spend with him, and it's really gratifying for me to be able to look out at what's happening on the campus and see the real impact that's come of his vision. So I really want to make sure we take a moment to thank Sunlen Cho. So we've told you a story here, a story about doing good in the world with engineering at Olin, which has been present on our campus since the beginning, about connecting and amplifying existing efforts through the community-driven process of institutional change, and about student developing and reframing what it means to do good engineering. This is a community process. This is a community story, and you all are part of our community. So we would like to take a little bit of your time here to have you help us tell our story. and understand what we're doing here. So we've got some friends, some helpers around the room that are going to distribute you index cards and writing implements if you need them. And we'd like you to take a few minutes to discuss with the people around you your reactions to what you've heard here, both from us and from Howard and Wendy, if you will, to write down your reactions, your ideas, connections that you might have, suggestions for people that we should talk to, or things we should be reading or looking at. So if you could please take 5 or 10 minutes, as I said, to really discuss this amongst the people around you, move around if you could to form small groups. We'd really appreciate your insights, and our helpers, as I said, will be collecting those back from you in just a few minutes, and then we'll have some time for discussion and questions. So thank you very, very much.
Hi, folks. We really want you to continue these conversations when we start the break in a few minutes, but we do want to see if anyone has any questions for us or things that they would like to share with the room more broadly. We strongly encourage you to keep talking, keep filling out those cards. You are welcome to hand the cards back to our wonderful friends who passed them out in the first place, or you can leave them at the table where you picked up your name tag when you came in, and we'll be able to get them from there at the end. We really want to hear what you have to say. But is there anything at the moment that anyone would like to ask a question about, share something with the room? Go ahead, Eric, and Susan's bringing you a mic.
Thank you for the presentation. I thought it was a really great overview of a lot of the things that exist at Olin, and sort of in my perspective as a student, I recognized a lot of things, like all of the things, but it's small, that's good. But I thought it was interesting because connecting it to one of the points that came up earlier in the survey results around at Olin, and perhaps disproportionately at Olin, people finding it hard to express important parts of their identity in public. And as the student body, we've done internal surveys on understanding that, and things like political beliefs and religious beliefs, which aren't strictly ethics, but are very closely related, come up. And I guess the thing that I'm asking and curious about, and I know is an open area for exploration, and we discussed some, is how do you build a strong community sense of ethics and importance in a way that is inclusive and not alienating to people who disagree with that? Because I think we want a very diverse community in lots of ways, and definitely as a student, I can share stories of lots of people who come into Olin and disagree with some of the things that we've listed as tenets here, and going toward a future where we aren't trading off inclusivity and having discussions about it, but rather making those compatible, is really, really hard. And I think that's interesting as a sort of how do you implement these sorts of things in a way that doesn't make it not okay to be in a design class if you don't care as much about the environment as the professor does. Because no one matches Ben Linder on that one.
That's true. No one can match Ben Linder on that one.
Right.
I would love to start by sharing something that we've heard from students, actually, at one of these weekly lunches that Rebecca talked about. A student mentioned that to them, it's not really about us telling them what doing good in the world is. It's helping them figure out what that means for themselves. And that, to me, was a powerful articulation of what I think is maybe one piece of the answer to that question. That it's not the whole answer, but that it's not necessarily about us saying what the right values are. It's about us helping students understand what their values are and being able to enact them. I do think that there are some values that we as a community do embrace all together, that we have consensus on, and we want to make sure that we're also being clear and sharing those and being vocal about those when they do exist. So not shying away from having community values, but also looking for opportunities to make a lot of space for students to figure out what their own understanding of it is, and to nurture a community where a lot of different understandings are valued.
Yeah, I completely agree with Alison. We've heard some great perspectives from students about this entire semester, and it really ties heavily into some of these ideas around perspective, around understanding that other people have different perspectives than your own, but knowing what your own values are, and understanding that part of the process of figuring out what your own values is to probe the values of others. And to do that with an open mind, with intellectual humility, with open, honest curiosity and empathy for the perspective of others. So I think that there's just a certain level of understanding of productive dialogue, an understanding of discourse and rules of discourse that can help get us a long way towards people being able to feel this is a safe space for discussing their values openly and feeling like that discussion is productive for all the people who are involved. Other questions?
More questions? You used them all up on each other. Okay.
I don't know what I want to ask, but I'll try anyway. So I think that this notion of doing good and human-centered design and has always been present in engineering. It's fascinating. The focus at Olin is really very interested to me as a person from industry who is trying to apply those principles. But I think that we are entering a paradigm now where Olin maybe has a unique opportunity, and certainly, I forgot your first name. Greg Mara from Facebook certainly brought some of that flavor, is that we are in the midst of a huge revolution with the creation of, not only the creation, but the use of AI in our lives. And it's with all the biases and all the other issues that we're dealing with. And I think that this is a unique opportunity for engineering and scientific community to rethink AI now, not 20 years from now. And perhaps think about this concept that you said a word several times about empathy. How do I embed empathy into the AI that I'm building so that AI can have the perspective of the human in it? There are a lot, the emergence of AI almost as another species in our society, learning and intelligent species in our society, creates huge opportunity to do good. And that would be a wonderful goal for Olin to go after.
Greg, I don't know if you have any reaction you'd like to make to that. You're our resident expert.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. There's a lot of conversation in the world right now about AI and ethics and objective functions and things like that. I think it'll be interesting for Olin to find where it has an opportunity to contribute uniquely to some of these conversations. And I think, especially as more and more attention gets poured on these problems, I think there's a lot of thinking that we'll have to do about what's the direction and angle that we can take that's unlikely to be one someone else would take on their own, or find a way that we can uniquely contribute and advance some of those things. But I think it's a really, really thorny issue on a bunch of different dimensions, and there's a lot of important thinking that has to happen.
Any more burning questions you got to get out? We'll encourage you to keep talking with each other again over the break. And thank you so much for spending this time with us and for giving us the opportunity to come and tell you a bit more about what it is we're doing here.
Thank you very much. We're going to take a break in just a second, but I just want to mention a couple things in response to this presentation that we've just seen, particularly for people who are on our board. We talk a lot about strategic planning and how that works and what the role of the board is, what the role of the faculty is. In my view, you've just seen the most authentic development of a strategy and a strategic plan that can happen in an academic institution. Okay, maybe I'm biased, but this is my fourth institution. I started out at the University of California. Their strategic plan, in my view, is primarily an algorithm for promotion of faculty members based on their independent scholarship. I was then an associate dean at the University of Southern California, where having a strategic plan for something that broad was basically like we create knowledge, we disseminate knowledge, and we preserve knowledge for the betterment of the world. Okay, it's kind of hard to apply that and get guidance for making decisions. The University of Iowa was quite similar. We create committees. The committees have, if you have 10,000 faculty members, you have 50 people on a committee. They write a report, it gets distributed for feedback, and it sits on a shelf. And nobody does anything because of academic freedom. People are going to do things with what you saw at Olin because they own it. They, in fact, invented it. It's really inconvenient from the board point of view because it's hard to know how you affect this. You know, you saw that early menu of all the different things. You know, we could have more impact. You know, we could do something about diversity and inclusion, and it settled on this one. Turns out this is a really good one to settle on. Almost every other academic community that I've seen is settling on socially responsible engineering, including the Olin MIT community that was here a week or so ago. 16 universities identified by MIT as the global leaders in engineering education came to the same exact conclusion a year after our faculty did. So it's a good problem to be leading in. Another thing I'd like to point out, we wouldn't be able to do this if it weren't for the generosity of Sunlen Cho. Not only was he visionary enough to see that developing this kind of forward-looking, community-based thinking was critical in order to achieve Olin's mission, he was willing to invest in it. So if you like what you saw, help us invest in it. And you can talk to Beth Kramer about how to do that at the break. So we'll reconvene in about 15 minutes and have another very interesting talk. Thank you very much.